Have you ever seen a bully kick over an anthill just to watch the ants scramble? Now imagine that on a galactic scale. That's exactly what Ambassador Cathari did, and he was about to learn a terrible lesson. Sometimes, the anthill has a dragon sleeping underneath it. If you want to hear about the biggest mistake in galactic history and the epic comeback that followed, you're in the right place. It all started in the Great Hall of the Galactic Concord, a place so ancient its walls were made of living crystal that had grown for over 40,000 years, recording every secret whispered within. 12 seats for the Elder Council were filled with beings of every shape and size, some with scales, some with feathers, some made of pure light. But the most respected of them all was the Lithori representative, a 10,000-year-old crystal being who rarely spoke. When it did, the galaxy listened. The young, ambitious Ambassador Cathari, however, saw only a fossil. Cathari was a hotshot, just 200 years old, with bright blue scales that hadn't yet faded to the gray of ice. He was sharp, and he thought he was smarter than everyone who came before him. He had clawed his way to the top by being reckless when others were careful, and he believed the old ways were holding his people, the Valerians, back. The Valerian Dominion controlled 40 star systems and had the third largest military in the galaxy. They deserved more, he thought. So Cathari came to the council with a simple request: permission to take over a little moon called Vesper 7, a moon rich with minerals his people desperately wanted. There was just one tiny problem. A human colony had been living there for 60 years. The humans have no legal claim to Vesper 7, Cathari argued. They're squatters who ignored 3 requests to leave. I'm asking for permission to remove them. Some of the council members fidgeted. That's when the ancient Lithori spoke, its voice like mountains grinding together. You wish to move against the humans, Cathari corrected him. I wish to move against illegal settlers. Their species doesn't matter. Oh, the Lithori rumbled. Their species matters very much. With a wave of its crystal arm, the ancient being summoned a shimmering, holographic book. The Book of Cautions, the Lithori said. It contains warnings about species too dangerous to mess with. Read entry 7412. Cathari sneered but read it aloud. Humans, observe only, never provoke, never threaten what they protect. They are patient until they are not. He dismissed the book with a flick of his wrist. With all due respect, Elder, that was written thousands of years ago. Back then, humans were primitives who had barely left their planet, Cathari continued. Today, they're a minor species with basic tech, no special powers, no natural weapons. They live short lives. They are not a threat. They are not a threat, the Lithori repeated slowly, because no one has made them a threat in a very long time. That is not an accident. Another council member, an insect-like being, chimed in. The humans are peaceful traders. Why risk upsetting the balance for one moon? Because balance is just another word for stagnation, Cathari shot back. The humans think they can ignore our laws and face no consequences. We have to make an example of them. After 3 hours of debate, the council offered a compromise. Cathari could send a diplomatic mission to offer the humans a fair price to leave. If they said no, he had to come back to the council. Cathari agreed, but he was lying through his teeth. The ship that arrived at Vesper 7 2 weeks later carried no diplomats. It carried soldiers with one simple message: leave in 30 days or else. The people of Vesper 7 sent a simple reply. They had built their homes here for 60 years. They had raised their children here. They had buried their loved ones here. This was their home, and they weren't leaving. Cathari smiled when he got the message. This was the excuse he needed. He told his military advisors, the humans have defied a lawful order. Prepare a strike force. We're going to teach them a lesson. An older officer named Verthon spoke up. Ambassador, the Council only approved diplomacy. An attack is a violation. The Council authorized me to resolve this, Cathari snapped. The elders are cowards living in the past. The humans are nothing. A little show of force now will save us years of trouble. And if they fight back? Verthon asked. Cathari laughed out loud. With what? Their cargo freighters? Their mining lasers? They're weak, alone, and far from home. By the time the galaxy finds out what happened, it'll already be over. The strike force arrived on a quiet morning on Vesper 7. Down below, kids were getting ready for school. Farmers were heading to the massive biodomes that grew the colony's food. It was a perfectly ordinary day. Then, the sky caught fire. The Valerian ships opened fire on the biodomes first, destroy their food source, and the humans would have to leave or starve. It was a cold, calculated strategy. But Cathari had ordered a demonstration, and his commanders knew that meant the message had to be loud and clear. The strikes weren't precise. The first dome vanished in a silent, blinding flash. Then the second, the third, the fourth. On the ground, people ran in terror toward shelters never designed for an attack from orbit. Then, a school built near one of the domes took a direct hit. It was gone in the blink of an eye. 47 children died without even knowing they were in danger. The attack lasted for 1 hour. When it was over, 60% of the colony was rubble. The final count was 3,247 dead, including 847 children. Cathari received the report and nodded, satisfied. He sent a message to the council saying the situation was resolved, leaving out all the messy details. But he made a mistake. During the attack, the humans sent out a distress call. It was picked up by a nearby trading vessel, and within hours, the whole galaxy knew what the Valerians had done. Cathari was summoned to an emergency session. He stood before the elders, arrogant and unashamed. The humans were given a chance to leave peacefully, he said. They refused. You killed children, the insectoid ambassador buzzed. You bombed a school. Unfortunate, Cathari said with a shrug, but necessary. They needed to understand we were serious. I assure you they understand now. A heavy silence filled the hall. Then, the ancient Lithori rose from its seat, its crystal body creaking like an old tree, and slowly began to walk toward the exit. Where are you going? Cathari demanded. This session isn't over. The Lithori stopped and turned its ancient eyes, which had seen empires turn to dust, on the young ambassador. The session is over, it rumbled. You were warned not to provoke them. That book, it was not a warning. It was a peace treaty, and you just broke it. Its voice, ancient and weary, seemed to carry the weight of galaxies. This session is over, the being declared, a deep sadness in its tone. You asked why we fear the humans. Soon you will have your answer, and I have no wish to see it. It turned toward the exit, but paused at the threshold for one last warning. That entry in our records, number 7412, it wasn't written by the first Concord, the Lithori said. It was written by the survivors of the second, the one that came before us, the one that made the exact same mistake you just have. What happened to them? Cathari demanded. The Lithori offered no reply, only the sound of its footsteps fading as it left the chamber, followed one by the other elders. Not one of them would meet Cathari's gaze. Not one of them spoke a word to him. They just left, as if the debate was finished and his fate was sealed. Cathari stood alone in the magnificent hall of the Galactic Concord, telling himself they were nothing but fools, cowards trapped by old myths. The humans were an insignificant species after all. They had no real army, no fleet to speak of, and certainly no weapon that could challenge his dominion. They would mourn their losses, file some useless protests, and in the end, they would accept their place. This was the law of the galaxy. The strong take, and the weak learn to live with it. Just as he predicted, Kethvari returned to his homeworld a celebrated hero. The news cycles hailed his bold and decisive action. The youth of the Voluxi Dominion looked up to him, a leader unafraid to do what was necessary. His political opponents fell silent, powerless against his wave of popularity. He was absolutely sure he had done the right thing. The humans would be a footnote in history, a story told to warn others against defying the Dominion. He could not have been more wrong. Millions of light years away, in human-controlled space, the story of Vesper 7 was spreading like a virus. Every single human heard what happened. They saw the footage of their cities burning. They read the lists with the names of the dead. They saw heartbreaking clips of children's toys scattered among the ruins of their homes. And in that moment, something inside them changed. It wasn't loud or dramatic. There were no furious speeches or calls for an immediate war. No riots broke out. Humans didn't react the way every other species would have. They just went quiet. All across their space, factories that made toys and gadgets started making something else. Scientists who were curing diseases turned their brilliant minds to new, darker projects. Engineers designing luxury starliners began drafting blueprints for something entirely different. And millions of people who had never met, with no leader to guide them, all arrived at the same cold, hard conclusion. The Voluxi had murdered their children, and that would not be allowed to stand. A response was coming. It wouldn't be rushed. It wouldn't be born from anger. It would be patient, meticulous, and absolute. Humans had an old saying, one from the dawn of their time: revenge is a dish best served cold. The Voluxi were about to find out exactly what that meant. 3 weeks crawled by after the massacre on Vesper 7. Ambassador Kethvari was waiting for the human reaction. Every single morning he would scan the intelligence briefs. Every evening he would ask his staff the same question: what are the humans doing? And the answer was always the same: nothing, sir. No angry diplomatic messages had arrived. No warships were spotted heading for Voluxi territory. Not even a single angry message was broadcast on the public networks. The humans had gone completely silent. At first, Kethvari found it baffling. He was prepared for something, at least some angry words, maybe a few economic sanctions, or even a token attack on a small outpost. Those were the standard moves for a species that felt wronged. He had a plan for all of them. But silence? It made no sense. After a month, his confusion melted into smug satisfaction. The humans, he concluded, were simply too pathetic to fight back. They had seen the overwhelming power of the Voluxi Dominion and understood they stood no chance. They were accepting their place with quiet resignation. Kethvari scheduled a press conference. He stood before the cameras, a triumphant smile plastered on his face. "The situation on the human colony has been resolved," he announced. "The illegal squatters have been removed from Vesper 7, but more importantly, we have sent a clear message to the entire galaxy. The Voluxi Dominion will not be challenged. We will not be trifled with. We will take what is ours, and anyone who dares to stand in our way will suffer the consequences." He paused for dramatic effect. Some have asked what the human response has been. I will tell you. Nothing. Silence. Acceptance. The humans have finally learned their place in this galaxy. They now understand that they are not, and never were, our equals. That broadcast was seen on countless worlds. Many were appalled by Kethvari's sheer arrogance. A few were even impressed by his audacity. But in human space, millions watched with faces completely devoid of any emotion. One of those watching was the old general, Verthan, from his office at military headquarters. Unlike his ambassador, he wasn't comforted by the human silence. He was terrified by it. Verthan had actually studied human history. He'd read their ancient texts about warfare, their endless conflicts, and their stubborn climb from a muddy rock to the stars. He knew things about humanity that Kethvari had dismissed as irrelevant. Humans were not a species that backed down. They didn't accept defeat. Time and time again, they had faced impossible odds and enemies far stronger than themselves, and had somehow found a way to win. They were clever, they were relentless, they were patient, and most of all, they were terrifyingly good at holding a grudge. The silence didn't mean the humans were surrendering. It meant they were preparing. Verthan tried to warn Kethvari, but the ambassador just laughed. "You've been reading too many history books, old man." "The humans from your stories were different," Kethvari scoffed. "They were scrappy warriors. Today's humans are soft, fat, and weak. They've had peace for too long. They've forgotten how to fight." "Or maybe," Verthan countered quietly, "they've learned something more effective than fighting. Maybe they've learned how to wait." Kethvari waved a hand dismissively. "Wait for what? They have no weapons to match ours, no fleet that could survive a single battle with us. Time is on our side. Every day we get stronger, and they get weaker. The longer they wait, the more hopeless their situation becomes." Verthan knew it was useless to argue. He could only watch and wait and pray he was wrong. 2 months after the attack, something odd started to happen. Human cargo ships began leaving ports all over the galaxy. There was no panic, no rush. They just quietly and consistently vanished. A human freighter captain would tell his alien business partners he was taking a long vacation and would be back in a few months. A human engineer on a deep space station would put in for family leave, saying she wasn't sure when she'd be back. A human scientist on a joint research team would abruptly announce he had to leave for personal reasons. Individually, none of these events meant anything. They were all perfectly normal. But when you looked at the big picture, a disturbing pattern appeared. Within 60 days, there wasn't a single human being left outside of their own territory. Very few species even noticed. The humans had always kept to themselves, just a handful of traders and skilled specialists scattered around. Their absence was a tiny ripple in a vast ocean. But the elders of the conquered noticed. The Lithori representative, still shaken by Kethvari's recklessness, called an emergency secret meeting. "The humans are pulling back," the Lithori stated gravely. "All of them, from everywhere." "Perhaps they are scared," suggested the Moric ambassador, a being made of sentient fire. "Perhaps they are going into hiding." "Humans do not hide," the Kritak representative countered. "My people have traded with them for centuries. When a human is scared, they get loud and aggressive, but when they are angry, they get quiet. And right now, they are very, very quiet." "What does that mean?" the Morris asked. The Lithori's answer sent a chill through the room. "It means they are not retreating. They are clearing the board." The other elders stared in rising dread. "Clearing it for what?" the Moric pressed. "For what comes next," the Lithori said, projecting a data stream into the center of the room. It was intelligence gathered from every corner of the galaxy. Human industrial production was up by 4,000%. Their shipyards, nearly dormant for 100 years, were now operating 24 hours a day. Mining drones were tearing apart every asteroid and moonlet in their territory. Then, the Lithori highlighted the final, terrifying piece of the puzzle. "Human birth rates," the ancient being said. "For 300 years they have been perfectly stable. 2 children per family, just enough to maintain their population." The display shifted to show the numbers for the last 2 months. Since the attack on Vesper 7, the Lithori whispered, the average has jumped to 4 children per family. In some places, it's even higher. Women who had been putting off having kids were suddenly changing their minds. Men who planned to wait were starting families right away. And the reason? The Moricast wanted to know. What does making babies have to do with a military campaign? The Kritak, an insectoid race, understood it perfectly. Their entire society was built around the idea that reproduction was a key part of their survival strategy. They told the council, the humans are getting ready for a long war. They're making sure their species will survive, even if a lot of them don't make it back. They're bracing for losses, serious losses. The Moragic asked, their own losses. The Lithori replied, or someone else's, we don't know for sure, but we know one thing. Whatever the humans have planned, they believe the price will be incredibly high. And it looks like they're ready to pay it. The elders forwarded this intel to Cathari, begging him to find a peaceful solution before it was too late. They even offered to help broker a treaty, warning him that the situation was far more explosive than he thought. But Cathari just brushed off their warnings, calling them cowards. He figured the baby boom was just an emotional overreaction to the tragedy. The massive industrial boom? Just a market correction. And all the humans leaving galactic space, they were just scared. He saw a simple, logical reason for everything. His reply to the council was polite on the surface but dripping with sarcasm. He thanked them for their concern and promised them the Valinexi Dominion had the situation completely under control. He even suggested the elders should stick to topics they actually knew something about. When the Lithe read that message, it felt something it hadn't felt in 3,000 years. Pure, cold fear. Back in human space, something incredible was happening. See, humans weren't like other races. They didn't have some central government telling every single person what to do, or a hive mind that made them all act as one. They were all individuals, every one of them with their own thoughts, dreams, and plans. And yet, without a single order being given, without any grand strategy being announced, they all started moving in the exact same direction. Factories that used to make children's toys started churning out high-precision components. Farms that once grew food for the table started cultivating the key ingredients for medicines and combat stimulants. Universities known for art and literature suddenly shifted their focus to engineering and physics. Even entertainment companies got in on the act, starting to produce hyper-realistic training simulations. Nobody told them to do it. There was no law, no mandate, no leader demanding it. They just did it, because they all knew it had to be done. A human philosopher once said that humanity's greatest superpower was its ability to cooperate without anyone being in charge. Other species needed leaders, commands, and rigid chains of command. Humans could just look at a problem, see what needed to be done, and work together to solve it. And right now, that was happening on a scale nobody had ever seen before. In shipyards all across human territory, engineers were working around the clock. But they weren't building your average ships. They were creating something totally new, something that had never been seen before. The ideas came from 1,000 different minds all at once. An engineer in one system came up with a better engine design. Another engineer, light years away, figured out a stronger hull. A third dreamed up a new kind of weapon, while a fourth perfected a stealth system. All these ideas flowed together, like small streams merging into a great river. In just a matter of weeks, the humans had designed ships that were unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. They were small, way smaller than the giant battleships other races favored. They were incredibly fast, faster than anything else out there. And they were quiet, so quiet that most sensors couldn't even pick them up. And they weren't building a few of them. They were building them by the thousands. The handful of Valinexi intelligence agents who still had contacts in human space sent back reports that were immediately dismissed as fantasy. The numbers couldn't possibly be real. No species could build that many ships that fast. Their sensors had to be broken. The data had to be corrupt. Forthan read these reports and felt a cold dread creeping into his heart. He immediately requested a meeting with Ambassador Kethvari. The ambassador accepted, but his tone made it clear he thought it was a total waste of his time. "The humans are building a fleet," Verthan said bluntly. "A massive one, bigger than anything they've ever had." Kethvari just shrugged. "So what? Let them build their little ships. What are they going to do, attack us? Our defenses are the best in the galaxy. Our ships are bigger, stronger, and there are more of them. If the humans throw everything they have at us, they'll just shatter against our defenses like waves on a cliff." "But what if they don't attack us head on?" Forthan pressed. "What if they do something we're not expecting?" Kethvari actually laughed at that. "Like what? Humans are so predictable. They're driven by emotion. They'll charge at us, blind with rage, and we will crush them. That's how it always goes." "These humans have been silent for 3 months, Verthan pointed out. "We haven't seen any anger or rage. All we've seen is quiet, methodical preparation." "That's not emotional. That's calculated." "Fine," Kethvari scoffed. "Then they'll come at us with their calculations and we'll still crush them. It's simple math. We have more ships. We have bigger ships. We have better weapons. No little toy the humans build is going to change that." Forthan had one last card to play. He'd saved it for last because he knew it sounded insane. "There's something else," he said, his voice low. "Something that worries me more than their ships." "What?" "The humans are smiling." Kethvari just blinked at him. "Smiling?" "Our agents report that humans are going about their work looking happy. They're not angry. They're not grieving. They're smiling. They share knowing glances with each other. They tell little jokes. They almost seem excited." "Maybe they're just a naturally cheerful people," Kethvari suggested. "They are not. Humans wear their hearts on their sleeves. When they're hurt, you know it. When they're mourning, you see it. But when they are at their most dangerous, they smile. It's how they get ready for a fight. They tell jokes to calm their nerves. They smile to hide their fear. They laugh to convince themselves that it's all going to be okay." Forthan leaned in closer. "Our agents say they have never seen so many smiling humans in their lives. Everywhere they look, every single human is smiling, laughing, and joking. It's like they're all in on the same secret joke, like they all know something that we don't." For a split second, a flicker of doubt crossed Kethvari's face, but he quickly snuffed it out. "You're seeing ghosts," he said. "The humans are weak. They have always been weak. Nothing has changed." Varen left the meeting knowing he hadn't changed a thing. The ambassador was convinced of human weakness, and he would keep believing it right up until the moment that belief got him killed. And Varen suspected that moment was coming very, very soon. Meanwhile, in human space, the work went on. Ships were finished, weapons were tested, plans were perfected, and everywhere, humans went about their tasks with a quiet, steely determination and small, secret smiles. 6 months to the day after the attack on Vesper 7, everything was ready. The humans had not forgotten. They had not forgiven. They had just been very, very patient. And now, their patience was about to run out. The day started like any other on the Valinexi homeworld. The twin suns rose over the capital city. Government drones buzzed to their offices. Military officers reported for duty. Ambassador Kethvari was enjoying breakfast in his private villa, casually scrolling through his schedule on a datapad. And then, in the blink of an eye, everything just stopped working. It happened everywhere, all at once. Every light went out, every screen went black, every ship in orbit fell silent. Every weapon system at every military base across 40 star systems powered down at the exact same instant. Kethvari sat in the sudden, shocking darkness, his breakfast growing cold. For a long moment, he couldn't process what was happening. A power grid failure? But the backups should have kicked in instantly. An attack? But there were no warnings, no alarms, no enemy ships on any sensors. He grabbed for his emergency communicator. It was completely dead. Across the entire Valinexi Dominion, billions of citizens felt the same disorienting shock. Military commanders stood on the bridges of massive warships that were now just dead hunks of metal. Pilots were trapped in fighters that wouldn't even turn on. Gunners stared at weapon consoles that were completely unresponsive. Communications officers shouted into headsets that carried nothing but silence. The entire military might of one of the galaxy's greatest powers had been switched off like a lamp, and nobody even saw who flipped the switch. For 3 hours, the Valinexi were trapped in darkness and silence. There was no way to talk to each other, no way to figure out what was happening. People crowded into the streets, nervously staring up at a sky filled with silent, dark ships, waiting for what would come next. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the power came back on. Lights flickered to life, screens lit up, comms crackled, the low hum of active ships filled the air once more. For a moment, a wave of relief washed over everyone. The crisis was over. Whatever it was gone. Then, the military started running checks on their systems. A gunner on a capital ship tried to fire a test shot from a main plasma cannon. But instead of a terrifying blast of superheated energy, a beam of harmless, colorful light shot out. It was pretty, like a party decoration, but utterly useless. A pilot tried to push his fighter to combat speed. The engines hummed, but the ship crawled forward, barely moving faster than a space freighter. He slammed the throttle to full, but nothing happened. An engineer on a defense platform ran a deep diagnostic of their systems. According to the computer, everything was fine. All systems were green and operational, but when he tried to run a live fire test, it was a disaster. The weapons shot out harmless light shows. The shields were operating at a tiny fraction of their power, and the engines could only produce about 1/10 of their normal thrust. Reports were flooding military command from every corner of the Dominion, and they all said the same thing. Every ship, every station, every single weapon, all of it had been changed, not destroyed, just altered, rendered completely harmless. For Than Reed, the news was a mix of horror and grim satisfaction. He'd warned them. He'd told them the humans were not to be trifled with. Nobody listened. Now, they were all getting the lesson of a lifetime. "How is this possible?" Kethvari screamed when he finally stormed into headquarters. How could they hit every single system at once? They would have needed access to everything, every ship, every base. Ferthen said quietly, "They had it." "That's impossible. Our security is the best in the galaxy." "Apparently not," Ferthan replied. Kethvari grabbed the old soldier by his uniform, his own scales turning pale with a mix of fury and fear. "You knew this was coming. You tried to warn me. How did you know?" Ferthen gently but firmly removed the ambassador's hands. "I didn't know what they would do, only that they would do something. The humans have been preparing for 6 months. They pulled all their people back from across the galaxy. They started building ships at a rate we couldn't fathom, all while they smiled, laughed, and shared private jokes." He gestured to the reports still pouring in. "Now we know what the joke was. They were already here. They were already inside our network. They've been there for months, maybe even years, just waiting, watching, and learning every single one of our weaknesses. And when they were ready, Ferthan finished, they just reached out and switched us off. But nobody saw them, Kethvari protested. Our sensors never picked up a single intrusion. Our sensors also never saw them leave, Ferthan pointed out. Think about that for a second. Thousands of human ships flew into our territory, moved freely through our space, accessed our most secure facilities, and then left. And we saw nothing. We knew nothing. The only reason we even know they were here is because they wanted us to know. Before Kethvari could argue, a new alert flashed on every screen in the room. A broadcast was coming through on all frequencies, hitting every communication device in the Dominion. A lone human ship had just appeared at the edge of Valinexi space. It was small, unimpressive, and looked like any other civilian transport you'd see hauling cargo between systems. But this ship wasn't carrying cargo. It was carrying a message. The broadcast opened with a single image. A child's shoe. It was small and worn, covered in a thick layer of dust and ash. The shoe had been pulled from the rubble of Vesper 7. It belonged to a little girl named Emma. She was 7 years old when she died. Then, a calm human voice, devoid of any emotion, began to speak. The Valinexi Dominion killed 3,247 of our people on the moon known as Vesper 7. Among them were 847 children. The youngest was 3 months old. The oldest was 17. They were students, farmers, engineers, artists. They were mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, brothers and sisters. They had done nothing to you. They were killed because one ambitious politician wanted to send a message that human lives were worthless. The voice paused. We are here to send a message of our own. The image of the child's shoe faded and was replaced by a list of names. All 3,247 of them began to scroll slowly up the screen. For each life you took, we will take 1 year of penance from the Valinexi Dominion. That comes to 3,247 years. Your grandchildren's grandchildren will still be paying for what you did. The names kept scrolling. You've just experienced the first part of this penance. Your military has been neutralized. Your weapons are now toys. Your ships are powerless. Your defenses are gone. You are completely helpless. Another pause. This isn't revenge. Revenge would have been faster. Revenge would have been our fleets showing up and burning your worlds just like you burned ours. We could have done that. We chose not to. The names kept coming. Emma, age 7, Marcus, age 12, Sarah, age 5, David, age 16. Instead, you will live. You will live with the knowledge that you are only alive because we allow you to be. You will live every day for the next 3,000 years, knowing that we could come back at any moment and finish the job. But we won't. Because killing you would end your punishment, and you deserve to be punished for a very, very long time. The broadcast ended. The screens went black. The lone human ship turned, jumped to faster-than-light speed, and vanished as quietly as it had arrived. For what felt like an eternity, nobody in the military headquarters said a word. They just stood there, staring at the blank screens, trying to wrap their minds around what had just happened. Kethvari was the first to snap out of it. He grabbed a communicator and started barking orders. Find that ship, track its FTL signature. I want to know where it went, and get our engineers working on reversing whatever the humans did to our tech. There has to be a way to fix this. Officers scrambled to follow his commands, just grateful to have something to do. But Ferthan stood perfectly still, watching the chaos with weary eyes. It won't work, he said quietly. Kethvari spun around to face him. What? Finding that ship won't help. It's just one of thousands. Fixing our systems won't help. The humans can just shut them down again, and fighting back is impossible. we have nothing to fight with. Then what do you suggest we do? Kethvari demanded. Just accept this, bow down to these creatures. I suggest, Firthin replied, that we face reality. We attacked a human colony, we murdered their children, we bragged about it to the entire galaxy, and now we're dealing with the consequences. He glanced out the window at the sprawling city below. Billions of Valinexi were out there, all learning the same hard lesson. The humans could have wiped us out. They had the power, they had the chance, and they chose not to. Maybe that means something. Maybe there's still a chance to limit the damage if we handle this the right way. Handle it the right way? Kethvari's voice rose to a shriek. They've crippled us. They've humiliated us. They're demanding over 3,000 years of penance. How in the galaxy do you handle that the right way? By not making it any worse, Firthan said simply. All across the galaxy, the news of what happened to the Valinexi spread like wildfire. Every species heard how human ships had slipped in and out of Valinexi space completely undetected. Every species learned that the entire Valinexi military, the most feared in the galaxy, had been rendered useless in the blink of an eye. The realization was chilling. If the humans could do this to the Valinexi, they could do it to anyone. No one was safe. No defense system mattered. The humans had been living peacefully among them for centuries, and during that whole time, they had apparently been studying everyone, learning every weakness, preparing for a day they hoped would never come. Well, that day had arrived. The Galactic Concord called an emergency session. The Great Hall was packed with representatives from every species, and you could practically taste the fear in the air. The Lithori, an ancient crystalline being, presided over the meeting. It seemed even older and more tired than usual, its inner light somehow dimmer. We have received a communication from the humans, the Lithori announced. They wish to address this council. I have granted their request. The massive screens in the hall flickered to life, showing a human woman. She was middle-aged with streaks of gray in her hair and smile lines around her eyes. She wore simple clothes, nothing that screamed authority or rank. She looked like she could be anyone's mother, anyone's neighbor. My name is Sarah Chun, she said calmly. I've been asked to speak on behalf of humanity today. The council held its breath. We have taken action against the Valinexi Dominion. You've all seen what happened. Some of you are probably afraid you might be next. I'm here to tell you that your fear is understandable, but it is also manageable. She folded her hands in front of her. We are not conquerors. We have no interest in ruling the galaxy. We don't want your planets, your resources, or your obedience. We just want to be left alone. For centuries, we've lived among you as quiet neighbors. We've traded fairly. We've shared our knowledge. All we ever asked for was the right to exist. Her gaze seemed to sweep across the hall, making eye contact with every single representative. Vesper 7 was a test, not for us, for you. You all watched as one of your own attacked a civilian colony. You watched as children were slaughtered. A few of you sent strongly worded letters. Some of you expressed deep concern. But not one of you did anything to stop it or to hold the ones responsible accountable. A nervous murmur rippled through the hall. We get it. The Valinexi are powerful. You were scared of them. But now you've learned something very important. You should have been scared of us. Sarah Chun leaned forward just a little. So here's what happens now. The Valinexi Dominion will live with what it has done. We will maintain a presence in their space to make sure they can't rebuild their military. This will last for 3,247 years, 1 year for every life they stole. She let that sink in. Any species that tries to help the Valinexi get around this punishment will be considered an accomplice. Any species that attacks human territory or citizens will get the exact same treatment the Valinexi just received. We don't want conflict, but we sure aren't going to run from it." The murmuring grew louder, and for those of you who helped the Valinexi, who gave them intelligence or funding or political cover for their attack on Vesper 7, we have a separate message for you. Her voice stayed perfectly calm, but her eyes went as hard as steel. We know who you are. We have the records. We have the proof. We'll be sending our representatives to have a little chat about how you plan to make amends for your part in the murder of our people. I strongly advise you to greet our representatives with full honesty and cooperation. The broadcast clicked off, leaving the grand hall of the Galactic Concord in a state of absolute shock. Representatives from a dozen different species just sat there, frozen. A few of them had secretly cheered on Kithvari's attack. Others figured that putting the humans in their place with a firm hand would be good for everyone. And many had simply turned a blind eye, believing that a tragedy on some small human colony was none of their business. Now, they all understood just how terribly wrong they were. The Lithori delegate pushed himself up from his chair, his voice heavy with something that sounded like both grim satisfaction and deep sorrow. "The humans have made their statement," he rumbled, "and I believe they mean every single word. Those of you who had a hand in the Vespera 7 attack would be wise to think very carefully about your next move." The ancient being turned to go. "This council is adjourned. I have a feeling we'll all have a great deal to talk about in the coming days." As the representatives shuffled out of the hall, each lost in their own worried thoughts, one truth settled over them all. The galaxy had just changed forever. The humans had just reminded everyone of a truth the elder races had always respected, but the younger ones had long forgotten. Some species should never be provoked, not because they were naturally aggressive or violent, but because when they finally decided to act, there was nothing in the universe that could stand in their way. The Volanixi had just learned that lesson the hard way. Now the rest of the galaxy was about to get the same education, and somewhere, deep in human space, the families of 3,247 victims watched the broadcast and gave a quiet, somber nod. It wasn't enough, of course. Nothing could ever be enough to bring them back. But it was a start. Justice was going to be slow. It was going to be patient. And it was going to be absolute. The humans had waited 6 months before responding to the massacre on Vesper 7. If they had to, they would wait 3,000 years to see their response through to the end. They had plenty of time. They had endless patience, and they had memories that would never ever fade. The galaxy could only watch. There was nothing else it could do. Within a week of Sarah Chun's message, human ships appeared in orbit of every single Valinaji world. But they weren't warships. At least, they didn't look like warships. They were small vessels, each with a crew of just a few humans. They settled into orbit and just stayed there. They didn't attack. They didn't make threats. They didn't issue any demands. They just watched. Every single day, Valeni citizens would look up into their skies and see those silent, patient ships hanging there, waiting. Some tried to pretend they weren't there. They went about their lives like normal, telling themselves it was just a scare tactic. They believed that sooner or later, the humans would get tired of it and go home, and things would go back to the way they were. Those people were wrong. A month after the human ship showed up, a Valency military governor named Thrakener decided he was going to push back. He was in charge of an outer colony, a planet far from the heart of their empire. He had been secretly stockpiling resources and putting together a small fleet of warships, hoping to rebuild a little of the Valency's military might. He did it all in secret, using hidden shipyards and avoiding every normal communication network. He was absolutely sure that the humans had no idea what he was up to. He was wrong about that too. One morning, Thrakener woke up to find his secret fleet was completely useless. The ships were still physically there, sitting in their hidden docks, but every single one of their systems had been fried. Engines, weapons, life support, everything was dead. They were just giant chunks of dead metal, good for nothing but scrap. There was no message, no warning, and no explanation. The humans didn't even acknowledge that they'd done anything. They just did it, and then went right back to watching. A year later, Thrakner tried again. He used different methods, different locations, different security systems. The outcome was exactly the same. His new fleet was neutralized before a single ship could even power up. He tried a third time, and a fourth, and a fifth. Each time, no matter how clever he thought he was, the humans knew. Each time, all his work was undone with a silent, terrifying efficiency. Finally, Thrakner gave up. He beamed a message to the human ships orbiting his world. It was only 3 words long. "How do you know?" The answer came back in minutes, and it was even shorter. "We always know." After that, Thrakner stopped trying. And so did every other Valency commander who had been secretly trying to rebuild their military. The message was crystal clear. You couldn't hide from the humans. You couldn't outsmart them. All you could do was accept the new reality and live with it. The rest of the galaxy learned this lesson too. The species that had quietly helped with the attack on Vespera 7 started getting visits from human diplomats. The Moric Empire was among the first. They had supplied the Valency with intelligence, information on human shipping lanes and colony defenses. When Kethvari was planning his attack, it was Moric's data that helped him pick the perfect time and place to strike. The Moric Emperor was a being made of living fire, ancient and immensely proud. He had ruled his empire for 3,000 years, watching dozens of species rise and fall. He had never bowed to anyone in his life. When the human diplomatic ship arrived, he flat out refused to see them. He sent a message telling them to get out of his space immediately. The humans didn't leave. They didn't even reply to his message. They just stayed right where they were, a single, tiny ship hanging in orbit around the Moric homeworld. After a week of this, the Emperor sent a fleet to get rid of them. 50 warships, the absolute pride of the Moric military, moved in to intercept the lone human vessel. When the fleet got there, the human ship was gone. The Emperor declared it a victory and ordered his ships to return to base. They never made it. Every single ship in that fleet suffered a simultaneous engine failure. They were left drifting in space, unable to move, unable to even call for help. Then, their life support systems started to fail. None of the emergency protocols worked. 50 ships with 10,000 crew members aboard were all completely helpless. And then the human ship reappeared. It moved slowly through the disabled Moric fleet. It didn't fire a single weapon. It didn't broadcast any taunts. It just sent a simple message. Emperor Morax, you provided intelligence that led to the deaths of 847 children. We are here to discuss how you plan to make amends for this. If you refuse to meet with us again, your fleet will stay exactly where it is until their life support gives out. The choice is yours. The Emperor met with the human diplomats the very next day. The humans didn't ask for much. They wanted a public statement admitting the Moric Empire's role in the Vespera 7 attack. They wanted reparations to be paid into a fund for the victims' families, and they wanted a formal public apology. The Emperor, who had never said sorry for anything in 3,000 years, apologized. Similar scenes began to happen all over the galaxy. Every species that had played a part in the attack got a visit. Every single one was given the same choice: own up to what you did or deal with the consequences. Not a single one of them chose the consequences a second time. In the meantime, Ambassador Kethvari had become a serious problem. After the initial shock wore off, the young politician tried to make a run for it. He chartered a private ship and tried to sneak out of Valanaxi space. His big plan was to get to neutral territory, find some allies, and start a resistance against the human occupation. He made it about 3 light years before his ship just stopped working. When Valency authorities finally found his vessel, Kethvari was still on board. He was physically fine, but something inside him had broken. The humans had left him in a small, bare room with no controls, no books, and no way to even tell time. The only thing in the room was a large screen that played an endless loop of images and text. It showed the faces of every single human killed on Vesper 7. Their names, their ages, their life stories, what they had dreamed of being, the people who loved them, and the people who missed them now. For 3 days, Kethvari had been trapped alone with those faces, unable to sleep, unable to even look away. When the rescue team opened the door, they found him huddled in a corner, rocking back and forth, whispering names. Emma, Marcus, Sarah, David, Michael, Jennifer, over and over again, like a haunted prayer. The doctors said he would eventually recover. They said the damage was psychological, not physical, and that with enough time and therapy, he'd be back to his old self. The human representative who met with the Valency officials had a very different prognosis. Ambassador Kethvari will spend 3,247 years in that room, she stated calmly. 1 year for each life he ordered destroyed. Our medical technology will keep him alive and perfectly healthy for the entire time. He will learn the name of every single person he murdered. He will come to understand exactly what he stole from the universe. The Valency officials were horrified. This is torture, they protested. It's cruel and inhumane. The human representative listened to them politely, then replied, "You are correct. It is cruel, but it is not torture. Torture serves no purpose beyond inflicting pain. This serves a very specific purpose. Kethvari ordered the deaths of 3,247 people because he believed their lives were worthless. He will spend the next 3,247 years learning that every single one of those lives mattered more than he could ever imagine. That is not torture. That is an education." She paused for a moment. "You might also want to consider it an act of mercy." We discussed several other options. This was the kindest one we could all agree on. The Valency officials didn't dare ask what the other options had been. Kethvari was taken to a human facility, somewhere in deep space. His location was kept secret. His family was never allowed to visit. He would live for over 3 millennia, surrounded by the faces of the people he had never met, forced to learn their names, their stories, and their dreams. Some argued that this punishment was far too harsh. Others insisted it wasn't nearly harsh enough. The humans, for their part, weren't asking for anyone's opinion. The old soldier of Varan watched all of this happen with very mixed emotion. General Varan stood straight, refusing to show the fear churning in his gut. He'd tried to stop this. He'd pleaded with Ambassador Kethvari, warning him of the consequences. But in the end, he was a soldier. He followed his orders. Now, as he stood in the cold, sterile room, he knew he wasn't innocent. So when the human ship arrived and asked to speak with him, he didn't fight it. The man who entered looked to be about his own age. Judging by human standards, Varan guessed he was at least 60 years old. His eyes weren't filled with hate, but with a deep, profound weariness, the kind you only see in someone who's witnessed too much. "You tried to stop him," the man said, his voice calm. It wasn't a question. "I tried to warn him," Varan corrected, his own voice raspy. "That's not the same thing." "No," the human agreed, his gaze unwavering. "It's not. But it's not nothing either." For the next few hours they talked. The human, whose name was Rothan, asked about the surprise attack, about Kethvari's twisted ambitions, and about the culture that could allow such a thing to happen. Varan told him everything, holding nothing back. He made no excuses for his people or for himself. When it was all over, Rothan stood up and, to Varen's surprise, offered his hand. Varen knew this gesture was a sign of peace, of respect. "You will not be punished," Rothan said simply. "You followed your orders, but you also pushed back. You put your objections on the record. You did everything you could within the chain of command." Varen hesitantly took the offered hand. What happens to my people now?" "You rebuild," Rothan said. "You learn, and you become better." "We will be watching," he continued, "but we won't interfere unless we absolutely have to. The Valani Dominion will survive. It will just be different." "Different how?" Varen asked. A sad smile touched Rothan's lips. It was the smile of a man who had seen so much darkness that joy was a distant memory. "You will learn to value all life, not just Valani life. Your children and their children will grow up knowing the catastrophic price of treating others as if they are worthless. They won't make the same mistake their grandparents did." He let go of Varen's hand. "That, General, is the real punishment. It's not the limits on your military. It's not the economic sanctions. It's not even what we're doing to Kethvari. The real punishment is that for the next 100 generations, every single Valani child will know what their ancestors did on Vesper 7. They will carry that shame," Rothan said, his voice softening. "They will be defined by it." Varen finally understood. In his culture, honor was everything. The stain of Vesper 7 would haunt his people for centuries. Their descendants would be apologizing for it long after everyone who was there that day was dust. "Is that fair?" he whispered. Rothan looked at him, considering the question with immense gravity. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe it's not. Maybe making children pay for the sins of their ancestors is wrong. It's a debate we've had among ourselves for centuries, and we still don't agree." He turned and looked out the viewport at the blue-green swirl of the Valani homeworld below. "But here's what I do know. If we just smashed your fleets and flew away, you'd rebuild. In 100 years, maybe 200, you'd be right back where you started. Some other ambitious leader would rise up, and another attack would happen. The cycle would just repeat." He turned back to Varan, his eyes locking on his. "This way, the cycle breaks. Your children will grow up with this memory burned into their history. They'll teach their own children. And the lesson won't be about hating humans. It'll be about understanding what happens when you forget that other beings have worth." Rothan walked toward the door. "We don't enjoy this, General. We take no pleasure in your people's suffering. We are just doing what we believe is necessary to ensure that a horror like Vesper 7 never, ever happens again. If we're wrong, history can judge us. We're willing to accept that." And then he was gone. Varen was left alone with his thoughts for a very long time. Miles away, in the great hall of the Galactic Concord, the ancient elders gathered to do the only thing they could: watch and remember. The representative from the Lithori, a being whose crystalline body shimmered with ancient light, addressed the assembly. "We have observed the humans' response to the attack on their colony. We saw them defeat the mighty Valonagi without firing a single shot in a battle. We saw them deliver a punishment without taking a single life. We saw them completely reshape the galaxy without conquering a single planet. The Lithori's light pulsed. The younger ones among you used to ask why we feared a species with such short lifespans and fragile bodies. Now, you see," the Lithori continued, "we feared them because they are patient. We feared them because they are meticulous. And we feared them because, when they finally decide to act, there is nothing in this universe that can stand in their way." The ancient beings seemed to look at every representative at once. "But there is something more you must understand. Something the old warnings never mentioned. The humans aren't just dangerous. They are also merciful. They could have shattered the Valony. They chose not to. They could have exacted bloody revenge. They chose restraint. A long pause filled the hall, and that, perhaps, is the most terrifying thing of all. A species that is only dangerous can be fought. But a species that is both dangerous and merciful is completely unpredictable. You never know if they will strike you down or offer you a hand. You can only pray you never give them a reason to have to choose. The elders slowly nodded in unison. The lesson was crystal clear. The universe was forever changed, and somewhere, light years away in human space, the families of Vesper 7 went on with their lives. They mourned, they remembered, and they raised a new generation of children who would grow up knowing their lost loved ones were never forgotten. The dead could never be brought back, but they could be honored. Their names could become a part of history, a solemn promise that it would never happen again. This was the human way, not annihilation, but memory, not revenge, but a profound and lasting justice. The galaxy was finally learning the difference. 100 years went by. Time is a funny thing in space. A century is a blink of an eye to an ancient Lithori, but it's long enough for deep changes to take root. It's long enough for new generations to be born who have only ever known the new way of things. The old galactic order was built on brute force. The species with the biggest fleets made the rules. That order was gone. The Valony Dominion was still around, but it was a shadow of its former self. The military restrictions were still in place. Human ships still hung in their skies, a constant, silent reminder. Young Valony grew up with those ships overhead, understanding what they represented. The old soldier, Varan, passed away 30 years after the reckoning. In his final years, he became an unlikely teacher. He traveled from world to world, speaking to the youth about what happened. He never defended the attack, never made excuses. He just explained. "We thought we were strong," he would say. "We thought strength meant we had the right to do whatever we wanted. We were so wrong." "There's always someone stronger," he'd continue, "and there's always a price for cruelty. The humans taught us that lesson, a lesson we should have learned on our own." His speeches were recorded and shown in every school, a required part of every Valony child's education. Some of the older generations hated it. They saw it as a deep humiliation. They wanted to forget the past and rebuild their pride. But the younger generation did something no one expected. They didn't feel humiliated. They felt responsible. A young Valony diplomat named Kiral was one of the first to give this feeling a voice. She was only 40 years old, born long after the attack, raised under the watchful eyes of those human ships. "My grandfather supported the attack," she said in an interview that was broadcast across the stars. "He didn't pull the trigger, but he voted for the politicians who did. He cheered when he heard the news. He thought the humans had finally been put in their place." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "When I was a little girl, I asked him why. I asked him how he could support something so horrible, and he didn't have a good answer. He said the humans didn't feel real to him. They were just a concept, a problem that needed solving. He never thought about the children." Kiral looked right into the camera. "That is the lesson I learned from my grandfather's shame. Other beings are real. Their lives matter, their children matter. And when we forget that, when we start treating them like problems instead of people, we become the monsters." Her voice was steady and clear. "My grandfather wasn't a monster. He was just a normal person who forgot a simple truth. I will spend my life making sure we never forget it again." Billions watched her interview. It started a galaxy-wide conversation about guilt, responsibility, and how to heal. All the while, Ambassador Kethvari continued his punishment. Even after 100 years, his sentence had barely begun. He had learned thousands of names. He could see the face of every single child who died on Vesper 7. He knew their favorite toys, their biggest dreams, the last words they ever said. Human medicine kept him from aging. He would not be allowed to grow old and die. When he was finally released in 3,000 years, his body would be the same. But his soul was already something else entirely. The humans allowed him to give interviews every now and then. In one, 70 years into his sentence, a reporter asked if he regretted what he'd done. "Regret is too small a word," he said, his voice a ghost of what it once was. "I destroyed 3,247 universes. That's how I see it now. Every single person is their own universe, a world filled with memories, hopes, and fears." He thought they were an easy target, a quiet colony of human teachers, farmers, and dreamers on a small moon called HFY 7. To Ambassador Kethvari, they were just a pawn in his grand political game, an obstacle to be swept aside. So he gave the order. No warning, no mercy. In one single brutal act, he wiped them out, believing the soft, peaceful humans were too weak to retaliate. He was wrong, and the justice they delivered was more terrifying than any war he could have imagined. If you want to see what happens when you push a peaceful people too far, you need to hear this story. When you extinguish a life, you're not just ending a person, you're ending an entire universe of possibilities. He stared past the camera, his eyes hollow. "I ended 847 of those universes before they even had a chance to begin. Children." Tears streamed down his face. They could have been scientists, artists, parents. They would have loved and been loved. They would have changed the galaxy in ways I can't even fathom, and I erased them, all for political power. His voice broke. "If I could go back, I'd stop myself. I would grab that young, arrogant fool and shake him until he understood. But I can't. All I can do now is learn every name, every face, every story, and carry them with me. Forever." The broadcast ended, but the shockwave was just beginning. Across the galaxy, the old ways of power, built on massive fleets and mighty weapons, were shattered. What good was an armada if the humans could turn it into scrap metal without firing a single shot? What use were planet killers when they could be rendered as harmless as children's toys overnight? Suddenly, new kinds of strength mattered more. Economic alliances, scientific cooperation, and cultural exchange. These were things the humans couldn't just switch off. The conquered had to adapt. Treaties were torn up and rewritten. Species that had been rivals for centuries were now forced to work together, sharing resources and knowledge. It wasn't perfect, of course. There were still arguments and tensions. But nobody wanted to be the next Kethvari. Nobody wanted to get the wrong kind of attention from the humans. The humans had changed too. In the centuries since the HFY 7 tragedy, they had become a quiet but constant presence in galactic affairs. You'd find human diplomats on major councils and human scientists in top research labs. Human traders moved goods between the stars, but there was something different about them now. Before, other species saw them as soft, almost passive. They smiled a lot and seemed to just want to get along. Now everyone understood that friendliness was a choice. It was something they offered because they wanted to, not because they had to. Behind those easy smiles was a patient, watchful strength that would never forget an unprovoked attack. A human philosopher, Marcus Webb, explained it in a book that became a bestseller across the galaxy. "We are not a warlike people," he wrote. "We prefer peace, cooperation, and friendship. But make no mistake, we are capable of destruction on a scale that would horrify you. We choose not to use that power, not from weakness, but but from a belief that there are better ways to solve problems. He continued, "The lesson of Vesperus 7 isn't that humans are dangerous. The lesson is that we've learned to control our own danger. We channel it into response, not aggression. We didn't act out of rage. We responded to a monstrous injustice with measured, appropriate consequences. This is maturity. This is civilization. This is true strength." His book was taught in schools everywhere. Young beings from every species debated it. Some called him arrogant, others called him wise, but all of them thought about what he said. Then, on the 100-year anniversary of the attack, the humans did something no one expected. They announced a memorial on Vesperus 7, and they invited everyone, even the Velini. The Velini government argued for weeks. Was it a trap, a test, or was it genuine? A young diplomat named Kiral argued passionately that they had to go. "If we refuse, we prove we've learned nothing," she said. "If we accept, we show we're ready to face what our people did. This is an opportunity, not a threat." She won. Kiral was chosen to lead the delegation. The memorial was stunning in its simplicity. Where the colony once stood, a garden now grew, with trees from a dozen worlds, their different colors and shapes blending into something new and beautiful. At the garden's heart was a single wall. Carved into it were 3,247 names, every person who died, every universe that was lost. Representatives from the whole galaxy gathered there. And right at the front stood the Velini delegation, forced to face the names of the people their ancestors had murdered. An old human woman with white hair and sharp eyes stepped forward. "My name is Maya Chun," she said, her voice clear and strong. 100 years ago, my mother, Sarah Chun, spoke to the Galactic Concord about what happened here. She demanded justice, and justice was delivered. She passed away 20 years ago, so I'm here to speak for her." She looked out at the diverse crowd. "My grandmother died on this moon. She was 53 years old. She was a teacher. She taught children how to read, how to think, how to dream. They found her in the rubble of the school she loved." Maya Chun's voice never wavered. "For a long time, I hated the Velini. That hate kept me warm. It gave me purpose. But as I got older," she went on, "I realized my hatred wasn't honoring my grandmother. She believed in growth, in learning, in becoming better. If she were here, she wouldn't want me to hate." She turned and looked directly at the Velini delegation. "You came here today. You traveled across the stars to stand before this wall and acknowledge what was done. That took courage, it took humility, and it's exactly what my grandmother would have wanted." Maya Chan walked toward them, and the crowd parted. She stopped in front of Kiral. "You weren't born when this happened. You didn't choose it. But you are here, facing it, and that matters." She reached out and took the young diplomat's hand. "The past can't be changed, but the future is still being written. We can write it together, if you're willing. Not as enemies, but as beings who have learned from tragedy and chosen to be better." Tears streamed down Kiral's face. "We are willing," she whispered. "We are so sorry. We will do better." The two women stood together before the wall of names, and 100 species watched in silence as something began to heal. Later, one by one, each representative placed a stone at the base of the wall. It was an old human tradition, a way to show you had visited and remembered. By sunset, thousands of stones from 1,000 different worlds surrounded the memorial. The Lithori representative, an ancient being who had seen empires rise and crumble, was the last to place its stone. It had always believed that intelligent life followed a simple, tragic pattern. They grow, become arrogant, and then they fall. But watching today, seeing enemies stand together in shared grief and hope, the Lithori felt something it hadn't felt for millennia. It felt the possibility that this time things could be different, that beings could actually learn. When it returned to the Concorde, the Lithori added a final note to its records. Humans. Observe them carefully. They were patient until patience was no longer an option. But when the storm passed, they helped rebuild what was broken. They are not merely dangerous. They are something far rarer, dangerous, and wise enough to know when to stop. The galaxy had been changed forever, not by weapons, but by the simple proof that strength without wisdom is meaningless, and that even the deepest wounds can heal when both sides are willing to try. Meanwhile, in a distant prison, Ambassador Kethvari continued his punishment. He had 3,000 more years to learn the names and stories of his victims. Perhaps, when he finally emerged, he would understand what it meant to be truly strong. Or perhaps he would just carry those names forever, a living memorial to the universes he destroyed. Either way, his fate served its purpose. Every ambitious leader in the galaxy knew his story, and whenever they were tempted by violence, they looked at Kethvari's fate, and they thought twice. What happened on Vesper 7 left a scar on the galaxy, but they didn't just rebuild, they created a lesson that would live forever. On the very ground where the colony once stood, a garden now grows, with trees from 100 different worlds reaching for the stars. People from every known species walk its quiet paths, reading the names on the memorial wall and remembering. On nights when the twin moons hang in the sky, some visitors swear they can hear the faint sound of children laughing. They aren't ghosts, not echoes of the lost, but the sound of all the children born across the galaxy since that awful day. Kids who will grow up in a universe changed by tragedy, a universe made better. That is the real legacy of Vesper 7, not the attack, not the terrible response, but the world that was born from the ashes. It became a world where every single life had value, a world where true strength was found in wisdom, not in weapons, a place where old enemies could finally stand side by side and choose peace. The elders had always warned, never provoke the humans. They were right, but they only had half the story. The truth was far more complex. Humans could be terrifying in their rage and unstoppable when they sought justice. Their patience could outlast mountains. All of that made them dangerous, but they could also be forgiving. They could offer friendship to the very ones who had tried to destroy them. They could help you rebuild the home their own fleets had shattered. And that's what made them truly remarkable. It was a lesson the galaxy had to learn the hard way. 100 years after Vesper 7, a young Valency girl looked up at the human ship still glittering in her sky. "Grandma, why are they still here?" she asked. "The bad thing happened so long ago." Her grandmother paused, choosing her words carefully. "They're here to remind us, little one," she said softly. "Not to punish us, not anymore, but to remind us that our choices matter. That when we cause pain, we break a piece of ourselves too, and that the only way to heal is together." The child stared at the tiny specks of light. "Do you think they'll ever go home?" "Someday," the grandmother promised. "They'll leave when we've truly learned the lesson, when we don't need the reminder anymore." "How will they know when we're ready?" The old woman smiled. "Oh, I think they'll know. Humans are very good at understanding people. Sometimes they understand us better than we understand ourselves." The little girl nodded, accepting this with the easy trust of a child, and ran back to her game, the ships already forgotten. But her grandmother kept watching the sky. She remembered the stories her own grandmother told her, of the time before, of the brutal attack, and of the shocking response. Her people had done something monstrous. They had paid an unimaginable price. But they had also changed. Slowly, painfully, over one generation after another, they had become better. And up there, in their silent ships, the humans were watching, waiting, and hoping. The galaxy had been completely transformed. The grandchildren of those who waged war were now the architects of peace. The lessons of Vesper 7 had been etched into the heart of the stars. The elders were right to warn against waking the humans' anger, but they never could have imagined the whole truth. Humans weren't just a force to be feared, they were teachers, and the galaxy was finally ready for their lesson. The memorial garden flourished, the names on the wall were honored and remembered, and across the galaxy, beings of all kinds saw each other with new eyes, not as rivals, not as resources to be taken, but as fellow travelers on a great journey toward something better. This was the world the humans had made. Not through war, not through destruction, but through a patient, relentless, and compassionate transformation. The elders had always said never to provoke the humans. Now, the entire galaxy finally understood why. And for that, they were grateful.